Okay, so let's get into this list of brain structures. We're going to start here on page 113 talking about the superficial structures. So if you look at these superficial structures, we're going to have some uh, various parts of our cerebrum. So this is all part of that thinking area of the brain known as the cerebrum. And so I'm going to put up a picture and we're going to go through these different parts and pieces. Now, when you look at some other videos from Dr. West, she'll show you actual models and you can see what those look like and identify parts and pieces off of pictures of models. I am going to use a simple picture here that is going to show us the different parts of the cerebrum. Now, I did a little research and look what I found. I found a little cursor highlighter that I can use now instead of trying to draw horrible lines all over my picture. So I hope this comes in handy for you, and don't judge me, okay? All this technology stuff is really been a steep learning curve for me. So I'm learning every day little tricks. So hopefully this will make it easier. Remember, the cerebrum is the thinking part of the brain. So it's this entire kind of brainy texture. Now, if you look on your list, look at the very bottom. It'll say gyrus and sulcus. Remember, the gyri are the raised areas of our brain. So it's right here where it says gyrus. These are these raised areas. And then the sulcus are the creases or the little folds within the brain. So all of these gyri and sulci are considered the cerebral cortex. Cortex is the outer surface of the brain. It's made of gray matter, and it's all of this this brainy texture that you think of when you think of a brain. Now, these are separated into lobes. And so you can see that these are kind of color-coded. This is the front of the brain here. This is the back of the brain here. And if you look at this, the lobes are really easy to identify. We're going to have 4 major lobes. They're based off of our skull. Actually, the skull is based off of the brain lobes. When we are developing as an embryo, the brain develops first, and then the skull develops around it. So I think that the skull bones are actually named after the brain lobes, not the other way around. But we learned the skull first. So when you think of the brain lobes, just think of the skull. So the front of the brain is the frontal lobe. The side of the brain, this area here, is the temporal lobe. The back of the brain is the occipital lobe. And then the side of the brain, all of this area right here, is the parietal lobe. So in lab, you don't really need to know the functions of these, but they are good to know to remember things. So for example, when you look at the occipital lobe is where our visual processing occurs. So everything that we see with our eyeballs has to go all the way to the back of the brain to the occipital lobe. The temporal lobe has various functions. One of them is auditory, because our ears are right there. So the auditory area of our brain is located in the temporal lobe. And the parietal lobe is a major processing center for sensory and motor control, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. And then, interestingly, our frontal lobe is where our personality is. So it does various things like speech and understanding language, but it also is where our personality is located. So if you're an introvert or an extrovert or a type A or a type B personality, that's in your frontal lobe. Now, I'm going to go through these again on a different picture, but I have this one up because the cerebral cortex is also divided into different quadrants. And so if you look at your list, it says we have a longitudinal and a lateral fissure. These are these big cracks going down the center of the brain and cutting the brain kind of in half from top to bottom. So the longitudinal fissure is this crease that separates the left side of the brain from the right side. So that's the longitudinal fissure right here. The lateral fissure is separating the frontal and parietal lobes from the temporal lobes. So this is the lateral fissure. See this big crack through the side of the brain. So our longitudinal fissure separates left from right, and the lateral fissure separates the parietal and frontal lobes from our temporal lobes. Okay, so let me go to another picture here. And this is kind of a better picture to show you the lobes. So see, this is the front over here. This is the back over here. So our purple area is the frontal lobe. This kind of rainbow color is the parietal lobe, and I'll explain why it's a bunch of different colors here in just a second. The yellow area is our temporal lobe, and the orange area is the occipital lobe. Now, if you look at our list, this parietal lobe is going to be for sensory and motor. And it's separated kind of in half by a major sulcus called the central sulcus. This is the central sulcus right here. It's between the blue and the red stripe here. This central sulcus divides the brain kind of from front to back. This central sulcus has two gyri adjacent to it. So you can see we've got this front gyrus that's blue, and we have this back gyrus that's behind the central sulcus that's red. The blue gyrus is called the precentral gyrus, and it is for motor control. So it controls your body. It controls your skeletal muscles. So what happens is you're going to send a signal from your precentral gyrus down to your body to move your skeletal muscles. That's what the precentral gyrus does. In contrast to that, this red gyrus is called the postcentral gyrus. The postcentral gyrus is for sensory. So it is receiving information from your body. So if you touch something, the sensory information goes up to your postcentral gyrus, and then you interpret what you're touching. This is how you can, for example, determine the texture of an apple versus an orange. All right. So you've got your central sulcus in the middle. You have your precentral and postcentral gyrus or gyri that are adjacent to that central sulcus. Okay. And so this makes up the cerebral cortex. So our cerebrum and cerebral cortex are made out of these different structures. Now, I know on the list here, under superficial structures, you have the cerebellum. Remember, the cerebellum is one of the major parts of our brain, one of the major four parts, and it is located inferior and posterior. So it's in the bottom back of your brain, and this is it right here. And if we look at it, let's see, we don't want that, we don't want that. If we look closer at, there's one. Let's go back up. If we look closer at the cerebellum, you'll notice that there are these branches. See, it looks like broccoli, or it looks like a shrub or a tree. All these branches in the cerebellum are known as arbor vitae. Arbor means tree, vitae means life, so it literally means the tree of life. So this tree of life is located in the cerebellum. All right. Now, so that kind of takes care of this first part of our list. So it's all superficial stuff. It's part of the cerebral cortex. And make sure you can tell one lobe from the other, and that you can see that central sulcus, the longitudinal and lateral fissures, as well as the lobes. All right. So the next video, we're going to go into some more detailed structures and go on from there.